What's up, Bulldogs? All right, this is going to be a long one, and it's going to be quite philosophical in nature. We're going to be talking about libertarianism. We're really going to be talking about humanity and human freedoms and basic human rights and first principles, really. Just what are some of the basic principles and tenets of humanity, of being a person, things that we could all perhaps agree on, but it's amazing how many people twist these ideas and these notions in order to fit their preconceived ideas about reality. Or really, in reality, what I'll really say here is that people, what they do is they don't want to believe the fundamental truths, like these principles, because they don't want to believe that the reality is broken, that they're actually slaves in a system designed to enslave people, and that they are also the cruel masters who actually enslave other people. All right. Now, I know that sounds really whacked out and everything, but let me get into this, and I'll tell you exactly where this is coming from. So this is coming from a video I did on why do you even believe what you believe? Do you even know? Okay. And I was talking about libertarianism a bit here, and then I got a comment on the video. All right. It's a fairly long comment, but I'm going to read it here, at least parts of it. And I wanted to respond to this because it's an interesting, I'm just amazed by this kind of view of society in general, right? I would recommend also that everyone read Harry Brown's book, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. Atlas Shrugged is probably a good one as well. Not everyone is as big of a fan of Ayn Rand. I totally get that. It's not that I espouse her entire philosophy, but she does have some interesting points there. And yeah, I think that is some required reading for everyone to at least to read How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World, because Harry Brown puts it pretty logically there. It's also not a bad idea to read Rothschild for a New Liberty. That's a pretty good book as well. But okay, so let's get into this. He says the libertarian argument that taxation is theft often hinges on the premise that taking someone's property without their explicit consent constitutes harm, as theft is considered a violation of the individual rights. However, this argument can be seen as a misapplication of the principle of harm for a few reasons. Okay, already we know we're getting into really just bizarre logic here, right? Just the sense that somehow we're going to justify taking someone's property without their explicit consent as not harmful. I mean, you really have to twist things in order to get to that. But let's see what he says here. So he says, number one, social contract and consent. Misapplication. In democratic societies, individuals contribute to a social contract by participating in a system where decisions are made collectively. Taxation in this context is a mechanism agreed upon through the democratic processes. He says, clarification. While individuals may not explicitly consent to every specific tax, their participation in the democratic process and the existence of the legal framework provides a broader implicit consent to the taxation system. Okay, let me translate what he said. He's basically saying that because you live in a democratic society, if you do, which that is not always the case, but let's just assume such is the case, okay, as I quote do. All right, so let's assume if you live in a democratic society, okay, then that system deciding on taxation, whether you agree with it or not, you have consented to being taxed or to the decrees of that democratic society by your participation in that society. Okay? So what's crazy about this is, and this is the main point that I'm going to contend with this entire thing, is that you cannot be obligated without having obligated yourself, right? And this is just, a put down the phone moment here, because this is so important for each and every one of you guys to understand. All right, this is extremely important to understand, which is this: nobody can obligate you. You can only obligate yourself, right? Any illusions you have of obligation, of owing someone, owing your parents something for giving birth to you, owing your siblings something, owing society something, owing your religion or God or anyone anything, okay, in this world that you have not directly consented to, right? That you have obligated yourself. That means you've signed a contract. That means you've agreed, even implicit agreement. I will even give you that. When you sit down at a restaurant and you order a meal, you are implicitly agreeing to pay the bill. I would say that that's not even really an implicit agreement because it is pretty explicit. Like that sequence of events, we could say you didn't sign a contract, but regardless, okay? So what I am saying here, and what is so critical, is that unless you have agreed to something, you owe nothing. You don't owe anybody anything. You don't owe your parents anything. You don't owe your siblings anything. Okay? Who you do owe, you owe your child. Why do you owe your child? Because you explicitly agreed. You made that contract. You chose those consequences. You chose to bring that life into existence. You chose to take that action, which would cause that consequence. And so now you have obligated yourself because you have done it by choice. You have done a thing which has obligated you. Okay? If you become married and you sign a marriage contract or you give your vow, your agreement, you are now obligated. If you sign an actual contract, if you agree, if you handshake someone and say, I will do this, you give your word, you now become obligated. But only through that mechanism, through your own free will, can you become obligated. Any other obligation is slavery, is theft, is abuse. I cannot put this more strongly, okay? Many, countless lives are ruined by this. This is why politics, this is why the philosophy is important. I was at a discussion at my wedding, and one of my best friends, he said, I don't want to talk about politics because it's not important. I don't care. Like I want to focus on myself and doing the things that I can do. And I agree with him, except that the whole point, the whole reason why we talk about these things and the basic human rights and freedoms and principles is because it does affect your life. Because if you believe that it is okay to take someone's property, okay? Now again, I am a tax-paying citizen. I will continue to be a tax-paying citizen. Why? Because it is not worth the threat of violence that I would undergo, that I am currently undergoing, or the consequences of that to not pay the taxes. I will allow myself to be extorted. I will allow myself to be abused in this manner, okay? Because the alternative is not as good, okay? But I'm at least realistic about that, okay? I'm not fighting, don't get me wrong here. I'm not fighting on some principle saying, stop paying your taxes. I am saying the same thing that Harry Brown says in How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World, which is get away with what you can. Okay? That's what he's saying is you don't owe society anything, you don't owe anybody anything, and yeah, the government doesn't have the right to take from you. So do what you have to do, obey the laws that you have to do. When you have the opportunity to break the laws, that are not moral laws, that are not principles that you adhere to, that do not coincide with your own philosophy of life, then do it. Just don't get caught. Or if you do, be willing to pay the consequences from it. That's what I'm telling you. Use your brain. Use your brain. Use your rational logic thinking and your sense of self-preservation and self-efficacy in order to navigate life. Do not just do something because it is good for society or you feel obligated to do it or because someone has pressured you into doing it or because it's, quote, the right thing. Do it because it is the thing that you choose to do and realize that your choices have consequences for you, okay? And no one else can obligate you in any way, shape, or form. All right, now we'll go back to the regularly scheduled video. Okay, so that's my answer to the whole social contract and consent part of that, is that I didn't agree to any kind of social contract. I didn't agree to it by being born. I didn't agree to it by living in this country because I didn't have a choice, because I have to live somewhere because I was born into a country. That did not mean that I gave my explicit or implicit agreement to anything. Number 2, he says public goods and services. Misapplication. Taxation is used to fund public goods and services that benefit society as a whole, such as infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Okay. Clarification. The provision of public goods enhances the overall well-being of citizens. While individuals may not individually choose every service, the collective funding supports a functioning society. Whether that is true or not, it doesn't matter. It still does not obligate me to participate in that or to agree with it. This is the problem with that. That still makes a taxation. It doesn't matter if you steal from me. This is a very faulty logic here, right? Because let's suppose that I am Robin Hood, okay, and I go and I rob a bank, all right? Now, does it matter what I do with that money? I guess it does, right? I guess if I rob a bank and I take that money and I give it to the poor people, or I, use it in a way to build a bridge, let's say, that helps society in some way, then it's fine. It's fine that I rob in that case. But if I rob and I use the money on drugs and hookers, that's not okay, right? That doesn't make any sense, but that's exactly what he's saying. He's just saying it in a way that makes him sound a lot more educated, right? And again, I'm not trying to pick on this gentleman, but when you try to make yourself appear more educated than you are, and you confuse people by your terminology, and you dance circles around logic, well, I really don't have much pity for you, okay? So, number 3, legal frameworks. Misapplication. The libertarian argument often frames taxation as an illegitimate taking of property without considering the legal frameworks that define and authorize taxation. Clarification. Legal systems established through democratic processes provide the framework for taxation. While individuals may disagree on specific tax policies, the overall legal structure legitimizes the process. Wow. Spoken like a true politician. A democratic process and a legal structure does not take away your unalienable rights. It does not do that, okay? It cannot do that, all right? Just because people, and here, let me put it into layman's terms again, because he's dancing around this again, right? This is what I hate, is when intellectuals dance around things in order to confuse the truth about the thing. It's as simple as this. He's saying, if we all vote for something and we say, hey, Jimmy over there, we don't like Jimmy. We're going to take all of Jimmy's stuff. And Jimmy's like, wait a minute. I don't like this. No, I don't like this law that you put into place that says that, Jimmy, you get to take all Jimmy's stuff. Oh, no, sorry, Jimmy. This is the democratic process, and we outnumber you, and we have voted and said that we are going to tax you at 90%, and we will take the benefits of that and use that for how we see fit to benefit, quote, society. Society is us. It just happens to be, but that's the case, right? So that's exactly what he is saying and justifying. In this case, it doesn't make any sense to you, does it? I mean, sure, when he writes it here, it seems to make sense. It's like, oh yeah, okay, blah blah blah. But in reality, what he's saying is that if people vote, if a majority votes and says that this is what we're going to do, then that's okay, regardless of what individuals it harms, because it's for the greater good. This is the utilitarian philosophy, which is a philosophy that has been proven to not be a philosophy that could even be implemented or that makes any kind of logical, coherent sense. There is no feasible way to determine the greatest good, okay, without individual sacrifice and harm, right? It all depends on perspective. And the reason why I say this is such a dangerous philosophy is because it's completely subjective. Okay, now submit this against what I am talking about, which is not subjective at all. Okay, I am espousing 3 tenets. Okay, the first tenet is that no one should steal from you. The second tenet is that no one should physically harm you. Okay, without cause, right? For any of these things, okay? And the third one is that no one should force you to labor, okay? So these things are they defend themselves. They are self-evident, you could say, okay? They don't require justification or a rationale, right? They make sense on their own. They stand on their own, okay? So let's move on. So I, of course, responded to this comment, and I just left a brief comment where I said, you cannot be obligated to a contract you haven't explicitly consented to. There is no such thing as a social contract, okay? So then he replied to it, of course, He said the objection that you cannot be obligated to a contract you haven't explicitly consented to challenges the concept of social contract. Here's the counterpoint. I swear I'm talking to an AI. I must be talking to an AI here. I bet, in fact, I am convinced now as I'm looking at the formatting on this that I am talking, that someone put this into chat GTP and is giving me responses from chat GTP or some other AI, because it is, it is so formulaic. But regardless, we will debate ChatGTP if that is what this is. So, I mean, in the thing that tipped me off right here is that he says maybe I'm wrong, but he says the objection that you cannot be obligated to a contract you haven't explicitly consented to challenges the concept of a social contract. When I literally said there is no such thing as a social contract. So yeah, you're right. It does challenge the idea of a social contract. That's literally what I said. Okay, I said there is no social contract. All right. So he says here, number one, implicit consent through citizenship. Counterpoint. While individuals may not sign a specific agreement, citizenship in a country implies a form of implicit consent to the established legal and political system. Explanation. Choosing to reside in a particular society, benefiting from its protections, and participating in its activities can be seen as an implicit agreement to abide by the rules and the norms set by that society. This is not true. Because here's the problem. Choosing to reside in a particular society, benefiting from its protection and participation. You didn't choose. I don't know about you, but I didn't choose to where I was going to be born. And birthrights, well, in the United States, birthright is by, or citizenship is by birth. So if you're born on the soil of the United States or one of its territories, you are automatically a U.S. citizen. In many other parts of the world, it is by heritage, which again, you do not control your genealogy, right? So if you're Italian and your parents are Italian and you're born as an Italian, then you have Italian citizenship. You didn't choose that thing, okay? So to say that I'm obligated by something that I haven't chosen is not correct. It's not an implicit agreement, right? Just because I live and breathe the air does not mean I've consented to the price of the air, okay? That is, there are some things that are basic human functions and we would say inalienable rights, right? The three principles that I had put forth, which he hasn't refuted any of those. He's just danced around those things. So number two, he says democratic participation. Counterpoint. In the democratic societies, individuals have the opportunity to participate in the political process, vote for representatives, and influence the creation of laws and policies. Okay. Explanation. Through democratic participation, citizens contribute to shaping the rules and policies of society in which they live, implying a level of consent to the decisions made collectively. Wow. Do you really believe this? Do you really believe that you are implicitly consenting to the decisions made by a collective because you have the ability to participate in the democratic process? Not that you've actually participated in it. Again, this comes back to voting. We're going to vote, and then, if you had a lot of people that didn't like you, would you consent to whatever vote, whatever democratic process, which you could vote, you could have your vote as well, that they decided, whatever laws or whatever, taxations that they decided? I don't think so. and so the thing is, just because you say, hey, you get a chance to vote, does not mean I can do whatever I want to. I can't say, hey, well, you know what? We're going to make this fair, okay? Everyone's going to vote, and Jimmy, you get to vote too, okay? Now, I got to tell you, Jimmy, the bill we're voting on is kill Jimmy and take all of his stuff and distribute it to the rest of us. Now, you might think that's an unfair, bill, okay? And I get it, Jimmy. But this is a democratic process, and it's for the greater good. And so you get your vote, okay? So if you vote, don't kill Jimmy and take his stuff, we will take that into account, and then we'll tally up all the votes. And then, at the end of the day, we'll see. In fact, actually, the way we're going to do this, Jimmy, is we're not actually going to do a direct vote because we're not a true democratic system. We're a republic. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to elect some representatives, okay? And those representatives that you can vote for as well, they will decide what is going to happen. They will have their own votes, and they will, they will work out the process. So what's going to happen though is that we're gonna give you representatives based on the population, based on the vote. So you, Jimmy, unfortunately, because you are just one person, You're not going to actually have a representative. So, we're going to get 3 representatives that we're going to vote for, and those 3 representatives, they will represent you by proxy as well. You just won't have one that you selected, but that's part of the democratic process. So there you go. No, I don't think so, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So, okay, we'll go on here just because this is fun. But, this one is fun. Number 3, freedom to exit. Counterpoint. In many cases, individuals have the freedom to choose their place of residence. If someone fundamentally disagrees with a social contract, they have the option to move to a different jurisdiction. Explanation. The ability to choose where to live provides individuals with a degree of agency, allowing them to select a social and legal system more in line with their preferences. Wow, have you ever seen a passport? Have you ever seen a passport, buddy? Look, as a United States citizen, if I have a passport, if the government allows me to have a passport and allows me to travel, okay, which means that I paid my taxes, okay, a contract that I did not implicitly or explicitly agree to. But if I have been a good little boy, okay, then I can travel to another country. I could even move to another country. But guess what? As a U.S. citizen, I don't get to do. I don't get to not pay the taxes because it doesn't matter what country in the world that I live in. As long as I still have a U.S. citizenship and I haven't revoked it, then I still have to pay taxes. So this is not quite true, okay? But I'm talking from a U.S.-centric Western viewpoint. That's not the case in the rest of the world. But before I go there, let's talk about this, okay? If I were to try and give up my U.S. citizenship, it's not just automatic. You can't just voluntarily give up your U.S. citizenship. You might think that you can, but you actually have to apply to give up your U.S. citizenship, and they can deny it. Not only can they deny it, but they can also charge you with an exit tax and hold you for ransom and say, look, if you want to get out of this, then you're going to have to pay a certain amount of money. All right, now this is becoming even harder to do, and there are plenty of instances where people have been denied their revocation of U.S. citizenship. All right, now, let's get to the rest of the world. Do you think that the rest of the world operates this way? Do you think that if you live in China, you can just go somewhere else? Do you think if you live in Ukraine, you can just go somewhere else? Do you think that if you live in, a majority of the world, that you can just go somewhere else and become a resident of another country? It doesn't work that way. So that argument is just ridiculous. It is... It's so funny to even use that argument because you have to dance around so many things just to justify a corrupt system. It does not make any sense at all. All right, so let's go to number 4, benefiting from public goods. Counterpoint, citizens often benefit from public goods and services funded by taxation, such as infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Explanation, enjoying the benefits of these public goods implies a connection to the social contract, and that sustains the funding mechanism through taxation. While the concept of social contract may not be a literal signed document or agreement, these points suggest that citizenship and democratic participation can be viewed as forms of implicit consent, and individuals have the freedom to choose the social and legal systems that align with their values. Okay, this is a big crock of shit. Let me tell you why. All right, so first of all, this is the argument here that he's putting forth, okay? Again, I'll just lay it out in layman's terms because he's dancing around it, which he's saying that essentially, if someone gives you something, you are obligated to pay for it. You have agreed to whatever strings are attached to that. So if you're walking down the street, okay, and I'm like, here's an iPhone, okay, and you take the iPhone, you have to pay me for that iPhone. Okay, no matter what the price is. If I said that the price is $50,000, you have to pay $50,000 for that iPhone. Okay, it doesn't matter that I gave it to you. There are strings attached. Okay, and you don't have to know what the strings are before I give you the thing. It doesn't make any sense. Just because something has been provided or given to you does not mean that you are now obligated by accepting the gift. Now, it is generally a good idea to not accept gifts from strangers and to not accept gifts because people will think that they have their hooks in you, and they will generally expect some remediation or some kind of implied or some implied agreement by doing that. But that in itself does not make that true. Otherwise, I could literally give people things and charge them money for them. It doesn't work that way. Okay, it's ridiculous. And again, like I said, his whole base of his argument that he sums it up is that there is such thing as societal contract. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as society. What is society? Who is society? What does society want? What is good for society? What's bad for society? I think society would need to be its own organism in order to determine what is good or bad for it. But society doesn't seem to have a voice. It seems to only have the voice of the most powerful people in society. It doesn't seem to have its own voice. And just because you can or do participate in a democratic process, if you're forced to vote for something, you cannot then say, well, you're the one who voted for it, because that's not what you chose. Only if you've explicitly agreed, right? If we walk into a room and we're saying, all right, the 10 of us, we are mutually going to agree. Let's say that you're in an arbitration agreement. You say, I have agreed that we will settle this in this manner, right? That we will set this to a vote, and whatever the outcome of this vote is binding. Then you have made a contract. You have made yourself an obligation. But if you haven't agreed to it, just because you've participated in a vote doesn't mean that you've agreed to the outcome. Okay? So I replied, of course, there is no such thing as an unilaterally imposed social contract. There's no such thing as a social contract. This is a made-up term that has no meaning, in which it is used as a device to control the population by a powerful few. It is a violation of your basic human right to be implicated in any form of contract which you have not specifically bound yourself to. Being born does not imply acceptance of a contract's terms. So we have more here. Again, if you're still here, hopefully you find this entertaining, but we're coming to the end of this. So he replied again with a fairly long reply. It says, the social contract theory doesn't necessarily imply a literal explicit contract that individuals sign. Duh. Duh. Okay. Instead, it's a philosophical concept suggesting that individuals implicitly agree to live under a certain system by enjoying the benefits and protections it provides. Okay, that is not quite true. Okay, because you don't have a choice. If you have a choice, then that could be true. But even then, I would say that it's a pretty if I put a tent out, okay, and this tent was in a public place, and there was a bunch of water bottles there and snacks and stuff like that, and it looked like anyone could take some water bottles and some food, and you did, and then I said, you have implicitly agreed to pay my price of $5,000 for entering the tent. That would be ridiculous, okay? But that's what he's saying. So, but then again, he makes the restaurant argument. He says, let's consider an analogy. Imagine you enter a restaurant and order a meal. There's an understanding that you will pay for what you consume. If you disagree with the terms or find the service unsatisfactory, you can choose to not enter the restaurant. Okay, there's a flaw in this logic. Can you find it? Okay, so if I enter a restaurant and I order some food, well, first of all, I am given or shown the prices. All right, I'm just given some food and then I pay whatever the price is. Now, unfortunately, the medical system does tend to work that way, which is absolutely absurd and ridiculous. And you're not obligated to pay for medical treatment that you were not informed of the prices for, regardless of what anyone says. Okay, if you're not told what something is going to cost you, how can you know what you are signing up for, what you're agreeing to? All right. Again, we have to go to the definition of a contract, which is a meeting of the minds. That's what a contract means. You have to be of sound mind, and there must be remediation. It must be understood. It must have a time frame in it as well. These are, if you look at contract law, these are the basics of contract law. Okay, which again, of course, this is a law that's derived by society and populace, but it is based on some pretty fundamental principles. The idea that someone needs to know what they're signing, they need to know what the terms are, and they need to know what the price are, and there has to be some kind of exchange of value, okay? And so if I go into a restaurant, I'm going to get a menu, and it's going to have the prices of the food on there, all right? Now, here's a perfect example of this. I have been into restaurants where I have looked at the prices, I have ordered the food, I have paid for, or I have eaten the food, and then they give me a bill, and at the bottom of the bill, there is a fee, a service fee that was added in order to pay our workers a fair wage or some additional crap like that. Every time that I have encountered that and I have said, no, I'm not paying this fee, they have taken the fee off because it is not a legal fee. I didn't agree to that fee. I didn't agree to some kind of additional service charge, right? Unless it was spelled up front. At the time at which I sign a contract, implicitly or explicitly, or enter into a contract, I must know what the price is. If I don't know what the price is, it is not a valid contract. We'll go on. He says here, Similarly, living in a society involves enjoying various benefits like infrastructure, security, and services. Taxes are seen as a way to contribute to the maintenance of these benefits. While you might not sign a contract explicitly, the act of living within that society implies a recognition of the system in place. And I get where he's coming from, except that what you're saying is that if I live, then I am implicitly agreeing to a contract by living. No, that does not fly. That does not make sense at all. Okay, that would be like if someone taxed me on the air I breathe because they own the air. Not a concept that would go over too well. Yet this is exactly what he's arguing for. All right, so this analogy demonstrates that even in scenarios without a literal contract, there's an understanding of mutual benefit and contribution. The objection to the social contract theory oversimplifies a complex concept and doesn't fully account for the nuanced dynamics of societal organization. And I agree with that. It doesn't, yes. No, don't get me wrong, okay? I'm not an idiot. I understand that in order for societies to function, there must be some form of mutual cooperation, okay? But what my argument is, as from a libertarian viewpoint, which again, it doesn't require libertarianism. It just so happens that what I intrinsically believe and what is fundamentally true is labeled as libertarianism. But those things, I'm not a libertarian because libertarians told me what to believe. I'm a libertarian because my beliefs match what they believe. Okay, there's a huge difference in that. I derived my own conclusions about life from first principles, from my own mind, thinking through what makes sense. And that just so happens that other people did that, and they came up with a true philosophy of life that makes sense. Okay, so again, to talk to that point, yes, societies do need mutual cooperation to function. However, it doesn't have to be a forced cooperation, right? So people can still choose to benefit from that. So in a libertarian society, for instance, let's take something as simple as fire services. Okay, you might say, okay, well that's a public good. Well, yes, but if I'm in a libertarian society, I don't have to pay for fire trucks. I don't have to pay for fire services. And if my house burns down, no one's coming to help me. But it's a choice, okay? But people that want to pay into that, they can. And you might say, that's ridiculous. Everyone should have their house put out if it lights on fire. Not true, okay? Right now, do you pay for insurance? Do you have home insurance? Okay, you have fire insurance for your house? Okay, so if you don't have fire insurance for your house and your house burns down, okay, I mean, the fire department's going to try and get there, but if they don't get there in time and, your house burns down, if you don't have insurance, you expect other people to pay for that? You had the choice of getting insurance. Okay, that's so in that way, that's how libertarian services would work, right? Insurance is just one of those services. Police force, all the things you can think of, even roads, all of these things. Again, I don't have time in this video to explain how that would work, but it's not important how it work. There are ways for it to work. If you want to read a good book on that, read For a New Liberty. There's plenty of other books on the subject, but it does explain ways that could work. But it's not up to me to explain to you how society will function. I can just tell you that fundamental human rights, no one should fuck with you and harm you physically. No one should steal from you, and no one should force you into labor. That those things, I just will never agree that it's okay to violate those under any circumstance. Okay, it just doesn't make sense. So, you have to figure out how society works. That's not my job to figure out. I'm just telling you that the ends do not justify the means. They never justify the means. Okay, it's a very weak argument to try and say the ends justify the means. You cannot build something good out of something bad by doing something bad, right? So, okay. So then he says, while you may advance an argument that the initial, or maybe it isn't AI, because he said while you may advance an argument, where it should be an argument, so maybe not. Okay, or maybe some of those things were AI. Yeah. While you may advance an argument that the initial choice to enter a restaurant is voluntary, the analogy aims to highlight the broader principle of participation in the system and the obligations that come with it. Being born into a society is not a voluntary choice, but the benefits and protections provided by the society still require some form of contribution for their maintenance. So again, this is a very broken argument, as you can probably see why. Again, I'm hoping that I'm teaching you guys to think with your brain instead of just accepting what people say. So what he's saying there is he's saying that, look, he's saying that it doesn't matter. I know you didn't volunteer to be part of society, okay? But the benefits and protections provided by society, they're going to require some kind of contribution for the maintenance. So what his argument is basically, look, we got to have these things. So however we're going to get them, we got to do it, right? We got to break some legs. It's fine. Some people have to die. Some people have to die. That's what he's saying. He's saying that the ends justify the means. He's like, well, we got to have society. We got to have rules and stuff. We got to have roads. So we're going to have to steal from somebody. So we're just going to have to do it. That's how it's got to be, right? As if we have to have society. We have to have these things. Again, I know this is kind of crazy, like, oh, what would we do without society? But the idea is that we would function still as a society, but one where people agreed to all of the contracts that they were implicated in. That would make way more sense, okay? So again, it's a very weak argument to say that that the ends justify the means, or that there must be a society. We have to do these things, so therefore, however we do them is justified. That's not cool. That doesn't make any sense to me. All right. So he says here, societal structures are complex and can't be equated to individual transactions. Let's think about this. Some hand waving. It's complicated. It can't be. You can't break it down to the individual pieces. Look, chemistry is complicated, man. Like, you just mix some stuff together. We can't talk about how, what enzymes and chemical reactions happen that break them up into constituent parts. Just trust us, it works, right? No. Chemistry, you can break down. There's some chemical processes, right? If you're a chemist, you know that you might have to go through 15 reactions in order to end up with a compound that you're trying to create, right? So they are broken down into each individual thing, and each individual transaction, and each individual human, and each individual human's rights are important in society. You don't have society, you don't have a healthy society, if there is such a thing, without considering the individual and not stomping on the individual. Okay, so the social contract theory does not rely on explicit individual consent, but rather on the collective agreement to live within a structured system. Again, collective agreement to live within a structured system. What does that mean? Who agrees, right? How many people have to agree? A majority of people? Is that really, are we really majority rules? Under what circumstances does this apply? And then who says what's good for society? Me, you, elected officials? Who says it? Okay. He says then, your misapplication of principle stems from a failure to recognize the inherent differences between individual choices and societal structures. In the absence of a mechanism to finance the collective needs, such as waste collection or wholesale food chain supply, the individual will suffer. And that's the point at which libertarian ideals will fly out of the window. For as soon as your survival or quality of life is threatened, you won't be a libertarian for very long. Untrue. I will be a good negotiator, and I will bargain, and I will trade my time or resources. Okay? And in fact, that's really what we have to do in life anyway, right? I mean, if you're put on this planet, okay, and you want to eat and you want to live, you're going to have to work. So you're going to have to figure out a way to barter your labor for some benefit in order to get food and shelter and all those things. So for him to say that, it doesn't make very much sense at all, and he's also assuming that you can't figure out other ways to do these things besides if all you know is stealing, right? If all you know is bullying and physical violence, then you're like, I don't understand how we can solve problems without theft or physical violence. That's literally what he's saying. Like, you have to really read between the lines here, because again, I'm not saying to rebel and to not pay your taxes. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying at least have your eyes opened to the reality. Okay, I'm not even advocating for, I really don't care what happens in politics. I really don't care. Okay, but we're talking about your own individual choices in your mind and how these things apply to your life in general. Because if you believe that you can be ruled, okay, if you believe that majority rules, if you believe that what is good for some society or some group outside of you, or the general good is how you should behave, it will severely restrict and limit your own sovereignty in your life. Okay? The reason why so many guys don't know how to live their own lives and just do everything to please their parents and become doctors and lawyers and call their mom every single week is because they feel some kind of obligation. And they don't understand that there's no one who can obligate you. Again, let's get to the end of this here. All right, so he says, okay, and that's the point. Oh, okay, we already read that part. He says, a final point I'd like to add. There are hundreds of millions, if not billions of people on this planet right now who are dealing with famine, poverty, oppression, slavery, sex trafficking, addiction, drugs, abusive relationships, exploitations by their bosses and companies and co-workers, underpay, corporations stealing from them, toxic pollution in neighborhoods, racism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, gang warfare, violence. These are life and death issues for these people. Government has to address serious survival threats, so it's best that petty ideologies are put away with because there are real problems that need solving. Wow. in one brush stroke, you are lifting up the individual and the individual problems, and the other one, you are wiping them away as worthless trash, right? Because yes, there are real problems in this world, but by stealing from other people and harming other people, it does not balance out the equation. It does not solve these problems, and these problems are not created by these by giving people freedom or their rights, their human rights, right? It's so ridiculous to say that. Okay, either argument falls flat. The one argument that says that allowing people to live their lives unfucked with, undisturbed, not being, if we don't steal from people and we don't physically harass them and we don't force them into labor, then it causes all these problems. These problems weren't caused by that. Okay, it's as ridiculous to say that they'll be solved by taking away that. How many of these problems have been solved? Have these problems been solved? See, because if what you're saying is true, again, this is assuming that the ends justify the means, which again, we know that the ends don't justify the means, that even if you did have a perfect society from this system of government, from stealing from people and physically harming people without any right to do so, it would still not justify it. But where is the ends? Because I don't see people not in poverty and not starving and not dealing with violence and gangs, and I don't see all that happening, right? See, the problem is that when you try to oppress people, people will rebel against that oppression, right? Okay, prohibition. Let's take prohibition. Great idea. I love prohibition. Alcohol is the most toxic drug that exists in this world. It has caused more harm, more death, more abuse. Okay, I was just listening to a book, and the guy said, a wife beater without alcohol is like a what I can't remember the analogy. He was like, it's like a circus without lions. So you see what I'm saying? Like, alcohol is bad. It's really bad. It's the worst drug ever. Okay, it's a legalized drug. They tried to do prohibition. And what happened? It did not work out well because you cannot suppress it. You cannot force people. Okay? Again, I disagree with alcohol. I think alcohol is bad. All right? I think society would be better if it were completely destroyed and banned and nobody consumed alcohol. I think you would agree with that. Even if you like alcohol, that's fine. But I'm just saying that we could probably agree that society would be better off without alcohol. I think we could all kind of agree to that. Maybe some people wouldn't agree to that, but most people would agree to that. However, the means to which we would enforce that would actually destroy the individual's rights, okay, which would create a worse society, in my opinion. And again, like I said, we're talking about trying to implement things that we think are good. We don't know the implications, right? Every time that you try to force something, you don't let the free market decide it, you have side effects and consequences that are unintended. And it's just like putting one finger in the dike to plug the hole, and then water pops out of this one. You got to keep on going like this. You push one button, another one pops up. Okay, that is how it is, and that is the problem with all of these things. Okay, so he says again, In the face of collective challenges, individuals inevitably confront dire consequences. The intricate interdependence within a society necessitates a system of shared responsibilities. When survival and quality of life are at stake, the practical need for collective efforts becomes evidently undeniable. I agree with this, okay? And guess what? It doesn't require government, and it doesn't require violence, okay? In most cases, right? So why I agree with this is because when you're in a situation where there are dire consequences and cooperation is necessary, people cooperate. They will cooperate on their own. They will form actual contracts and actual agreements that will benefit both parties. They will work together collectively in agreement in order to do those things, right? The problem is when I form an agreement with Joe and then we try to bind Jimmy to it, okay? Because Jimmy didn't agree to the damn thing, all right? That's the problem, okay? And then, again, like I said, what he's saying is absolutely correct, right? When you have dire situations and things that need to be done, people will work together to get those things done, but they should do that by choice. Those mutual agreements should spontaneously arrive naturally. They should not be forced upon someone, because when you force it upon someone, now you have to deprive someone of their property or their labor, or you have to use physical violence to coerce them into cooperating. Okay, so this is a crucial point often overlooked and frequently sidelined by pure libertarian dogma, as real-world challenges often require cooperative solutions for the greater well-being of the community. Again, I don't disagree with that, but libertarian dogma, as defined, does not preclude that. That is part of it. That is the whole idea, is that you actually agree to these things and you form a community of mutual interest and mutual agreement. The intricate interplay between individual liberty and communal responsibility, there's that word again, highlights or underscores the intricate tapestry of societal structures. There is no communal responsibility. Again, another nonsense made-up word. It doesn't make any sense. Why are you responsible to the community? Are you responsible for your country? Do you owe allegiance to your country? Do you owe allegiance to your society? Do you even really owe allegiance to your family, aside from your children because or your spouse because you have made an agreement? No? You don't owe any allegiance. Why would you owe allegiance? Where did this concept even come from? Why do we implicitly just agree to these things? Why would you think that is true? I could just make up something and say you owe me allegiance. Why don't you just owe me allegiance? Why don't I just form a group of people and say you owe us allegiance? That's literally what's happened here. Okay? Literally, government is literally that. Some people that gain power said you owe us allegiance, and now you are obligated to whatever we decide. And we'll give you some kind of a vote. That doesn't change the fact that the power structure was already put into place. Okay? So it's just ridiculous to think that that there is some kind of communal responsibility. There is none. That's a misnomer. And I said finally here, the ends never justify the means. There is no implicit contract to which I have not agreed to. It is called slavery or extortion. You have to jump through so many hoops to somehow make sense of the world you're living in, because you deny the true reality that you're both a slave and the cruel master. And he said, which I haven't even read this one yet. Oh wow, this is long. This would be a long video, but hey, we're almost to the end of this. The phrase, the ends never justify the means, is often presented as a guiding ethical principle, suggesting that certain actions, regardless of their perceived positive outcomes, should be avoided if they involve unethical or immoral methods. Correct? However, there are exceptions to this principle which suggest that this may not be an absolute rule. Is there really? Am I reading this correctly? Are you telling me, okay? Are you telling me that there are times in which case, okay, that it is okay to be unethical or immoral if being unethical or immoral benefits the greater good? Is that what you're really saying here? That because of their perceived positive outcomes. So As long as there's a perceived possible outcome, there are certain circumstances where doing something unethical or immoral is the right thing to do. That doesn't really. I don't really see any places where that actually fits. So let me just give you the example that I give people all the time because it's a very unusual one. Okay, so let's suppose that there were, I don't know, let's say 10 million people in the world that have this disease. Okay, their hearts are going to explode. We know it. We've seen people already die from this disease. Okay, it's a tragic disease. All right. However, there's this one girl that's born with this genetic mutation that makes it so that her heart is it's immune to this disease. Now, unfortunately, the only way in which we can find a cure for this disease is if we cut her open and we examine her heart. Okay. Now, unfortunately, we have to cut her open in such a way that it will kill her. And unfortunately, we cannot use any kind of anesthetic because doing so would actually cause the function in our heart that is causing this to stop working and we won't be able to observe it. So we have to cut her open, with her screaming, feeling all the pain of that, and basically torture her to death, and she'll eventually die from these wounds. But it will save 2 million, it will save 10 million people. Is it okay? Now, some people will argue and say, yes, it is okay, the greater good. However, I don't think any person that had to make that choice would actually make the choice or would do the thing, right? Again, you might order someone else to do it, but would you hold a scalpel and do the thing to the innocent person? And yes, you might say this is an extreme example. And I agree, it is an extreme example. But a principle must hold true to any example. If it is a true principle, it does not change, okay? The law of gravity is always the law of gravity, okay? The fundamental principles that govern the universe do not change. That's why they are principles. They are always applicable. They can never be violated. That is what a principle is. It's an axiom for life, all right? And so, yes, even though that's a cruel example, it is still a valid example. And so if you would justify any time that you could commit an immoral act, okay, in order to have a perceived greater good, then you would also justify, in this case, the cutting open of this girl in this fictitious example. Right? Do you understand why this is so important? Again, this is what I was talking about in the original video about thinking things through. You have to really, really think things through. Otherwise, someone like this, who has a fancy vocabulary and is a intellectual, will run circles around you because what he says is going to make some sense to you, and it's going to seem like it's a well thought out argument because you're not using your own arguments to really think through these things. Okay, because what I'm seeing is just a bunch of bullshit. Honestly, right? Like, again, I can survive a rational argument that makes sense. It's fine. You don't have to agree with me 100% of the time. There's plenty of times where I'm wrong. But I want to see rationally. I want an actual explanation. I want to see the first principles. I want to see your argument based on principles or at least derived from axioms that build it up. If you don't show me that and you just do some hand waving, I have no respect for the argument. In a broader sense, it could be more accurately described as a general guideline rather than an inviolable principle. The recognition of exceptions underscores the complexity of ethical decision-making, as context and specific circumstances may influence the moral evaluation of actions. It may be more fitting to view it as a foundational concept that guides ethical thinking while allowing for thoughtful consideration of unique situations. Again, a bunch of bullcrap here, right? What the hell does that even mean? I know what he's implying there, but it's just some hand-waving around this. Again, why is what he's saying correct? What basis is it? Is there, a lot of people that finally, that have no real scientific basis for their arguments, they will appeal to a moral authority. Okay, so there's plenty of arguments where it's like, well, why is murder bad? Okay, well, I mean, it harms people, blah blah blah. Ultimately, what a lot of people will say is, after you run circles around them, is they'll say, because God, because it's wrong, because it's morally wrong, right? That is like the one argument that you can make that I can't really disagree with. If you say something's morally wrong, and we all would agree that it's morally wrong, yeah, okay, then unless you don't believe at all in any kind of morals, then you would say, okay, well, you got me there, right? Like that's kind of right. So here, what he's saying, like all of his arguments, he's saying literally there's some higher authority than moral authority. There's some higher authority than God, right? If that makes what he's saying correct. Like, do you really understand what he's saying here? Because that's what he's saying. He is saying that he already threw out morals. He said there are situations where you don't have to be moral or ethical, where you can do something that is, as he put it, certain actions, regardless of the perceived positive outcomes, should be avoided if they involve unethical or immoral methods. So he's saying the opposite. He's saying if it is unethical or immoral, it is okay based on his higher authority that he's appealing to. That's higher than the moral authority. This is amazing. Where does this authority come from? Who decreed this? It came from where? From brainwashing. It came from what we've been led to believe. It didn't. Where did it come from? You tell me. Where is the argument come from? It doesn't come from logic. It doesn't come from axioms. Like what I'm saying comes from logical axioms derived from first principles, right? What I'm saying is I'm just making three fundamental truths that I think we could all agree with. One, no one should steal from you. Okay, no one should take your stuff. Two, no one should force you into labor. Okay, and three, nobody should physically harm you without reason, without defense. Okay, we could expand upon that and say, in the case that someone needs to defend themselves or you're doing physical harm, they can retaliate with violence. That's a different thing. But basically, no one should just fuck with you when you're not fucking with anyone. That's the basic principle. And then everything else I'm saying is derived from those three things. So if you disagree with those three fundamental things, in which case, hey, give me your address, because if you're okay with some of those things, that's you know what I'm saying. But most people wouldn't disagree with it for themselves, right? Like there's no point in which you would say it doesn't matter how many people vote. You guys are going to beat me up? It doesn't matter if it's a democratic process. If someone's like, yeah, we're going to beat you to an inch of your life, but we voted on it and it's okay. And you got to vote also. You didn't vote yes, but it doesn't matter. We had enough people to vote yes. And so we're going to beat you with an inch of your life. No one would agree to that. You wouldn't agree to that. So that's why I'm coming up with these first principles, is because I'm just saying stuff that no one would disagree with for themselves. Now, for other people, you'd be like, yeah, we can beat him up, or yeah, we can steal his stuff. Yeah, it's for universal healthcare. We got to steal his stuff in order to take care of other people. That's fine, but not my stuff, or only the stuff that I want you to steal, right? Which is not really theft. Okay, if you agree to it, then it's not really theft. But if I don't agree to it, then it is. So again, I'm belaboring the point, but let's move on. Okay. So he goes on to say, in the realm of public safety, consider the act of stopping at a red traffic light. This means, in this case, it is adhering to traffic rules, even though it momentarily restricts individual freedom to move forward. However, the end goal is to prevent accidents and maintain overall safety. While the means involve a constraint, the broader societal benefit justifies the restriction. Again, I mean, this is a really specific example, okay? But let's take the traffic light, all right? Here's the thing about this, okay? I did agree to the traffic light. I did sign a contract because guess what? I got a driver's license, okay? And as part of getting that driver's license, I agreed to adhere to the rules of the road in order to drive my car. Now, you could make the argument that who gets to decide whether I can own or drive a car. And again, then we get into, the societal structures and those things and taxation and all that stuff. But let's just say in this case, in this not libertarian society, I have consented to stopping at stoplights. Also, I don't have to stop at a stoplight, okay? If I don't stop at a stoplight, yeah, there could be some consequences for that, okay? And I could accept those consequences if I wanted to accept those consequences, all right? Again, you could make that argument for anything. But in this case, it doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. And again, I don't want to go too far into this, but the whole thing, this is one specific law that's built up on an entire system that is built on a shaky foundation, right? So yeah, within its own system, does it make sense? Will I stop at stoplights the same way I'm paying taxes right now? Okay, I will do it. Okay, now of course, as you may also do, I think a better example is the speed limit. How many times do you follow the speed limit? You follow the speed limit every time you drive? Oh, no, oh, you don't. You don't follow the speed limit every time you drive. But you stop at stoplights, right? Oh, you mostly do, right? Okay. I mean, sometimes I don't stop at stoplights. Like if it says no right turn on red, if I don't see any cars, I just turn on red if there's no camera. Maybe you don't do that, but I bet you follow the speed limit all the time, don't you? Oh, you don't. Why don't you follow the speed limit all the time? Oh, because it's ridiculous. Because it's okay if it's still safe. You're using your own judgment. Because you're willing to pay the consequence if you get a speeding ticket. Okay. So again, I think I made my point. Okay, so let's go on to what he says here. Another example lies in environmental regulations. Industries may face constraints in terms of emissions and waste disposal to protect the environment. Although these constraints might be perceived as limiting individual business freedom, the collective end goal is the preservation of the environment for everyone. Okay, so again, same thing here. It's hard to imagine this because we don't live in a libertarian society, but imagine that everything was owned by someone or by a group of people who collectively decided to pool their resources and form a consortium, okay? Or form some kind of, agreement together, okay? That was mutually agreed upon, that they entered into, okay? Let's say like a river that's being polluted by in an industrial complex, okay? That river that was owned by someone, all right, would be damaged, right? That person that would be polluting into that river, okay, would be damaging that other person's property, okay? In which case, there would be due recourse for that. That person would be entitled to recourse because they have been damaged, okay? So it's not that you just have to protect society or protect the environment. In a actual libertarian society, again, this is very hard to explain in a short video, but that's why I said, read For a New Liberty, or there's some similar books like that explain this more in depth. But that is the circumstance in which that would be remedied, okay? And there would be some methods that people would have agreed upon and be bound to that would remedy that situation. All right. These examples illustrate situations where the principle that the ends never justify the means may not hold universally, as certain constraints are essential for the greater good and collective well-being. Again, this still is not the same thing. There's no evil ends here that's happening in terms of violation of people's rights and individual freedoms and principles. Okay, the three principles that I had outlined is that no one should be able to force you to labor, no one should be able to steal your stuff, and no one should be able to physically harm you without a reason for these things that you've consented to, or that you have violated someone and that is the recourse for that action. Okay, so the idea that the ends sometimes justify the means is still not correct. It is never going to be a correct principle. All right. The final thing he says is, finally, it's essential to recognize that societal structures inherently involve a degree of collective responsibility. The idea of an implicit contract is not about justifying any means, but acknowledging the practical need for cooperation in a complex society. Referring to it as slavery or extortion oversimplifies the intricate dynamics at play. Embracing collective efforts for common goods doesn't equate to a servitude. Rather, it reflects a recognition of shared interests and mutual benefits, fostering a more nuanced understanding of social contracts beyond a simplistic master-slave analogy. Again, a lot of mumbo jumbo there, but if you read between the lines, what he's saying here, okay, which is, again, this whole point that I'm rallying against, is he's saying that there is a degree of collective responsibility, okay, and he's saying that embracing this collective efforts for common good doesn't equate to servitude. It reflects a recognition of shared interests and mutual benefits. So if I don't recognize those shared interests or mutual benefits, why am I bound to them? I agree. If you agree to things and you recognize the mutual, shared interests, and you voluntarily participate in the system, and you're okay to be bound by the rules of that system, then that's fine. But that's not the case here. Okay, and even in that case, right, where you do subject yourself to that system, you are assuming that it will be fair. However you define that. If it's not fair, you won't agree to it anymore, right? So that's the whole thing, like I said, with Jimmy, all right? If we all vote to take Jimmy's stuff and beat him within an inch of his life, he's probably not going to like that. He's probably going to say, well, wait a minute. I agreed with the system until the system turned against me, right? So it's fine when you're taking things from other people, okay, and when you're stealing from other people, but it's not fine when they're being taken from you. Right, and that's, I mean, a lot of people are brainwashed to believe that it is okay, and that's fine. If you want to think that, that's fine. But there is what happens when you don't, let's say again, let's look at taxes, okay? Whatever you're being taxed right now, maybe you're being taxed a large amount, maybe a small amount, okay? But if society voted and said, whatever your salary is, right, just imagine whatever your particular salary is. If society voted and said, whatever it is, whatever the range that yours is, you're not going to be taxed at 80%. You're just okay with that? Because society voted for that because it's a democratic process? Or now are you going to have a problem? You see the problem? It's like, as long as it's like just a little bit of theft, as long as it's just a little bit of roughing people up, as long as it's just a little bit of slave labor, then it's okay. It's all right. I'm okay with that. But if you push it too far, then I don't agree with the system anymore. So you can tell that it's not a voluntary system at that point. And that's the whole problem with this. And the reason why people don't see it eye to eye on many of these things, well, first of all, is that most people are brainwashed. They don't really even understand that this is taking place. They haven't even considered the three fundamental principles, right? And they don't realize how it's being violated because they've just been told from their birth that you have to pay your taxes and you have to be a good citizen and you have societal responsibilities and all of this kind of hogwash and bullshit that is not true, okay? And the second reason why is because it hasn't been taken to an extreme yet. Okay, and it can very easily, right? There's nothing that prevents these laws or from this government from doing whatever it wants. And I do remember, what was it? Not just a couple years ago, weren't we locked in our houses? Weren't we forced to wear masks on our faces? Weren't we forced to undergo non-elective medical procedures? I mean, fortunately, some of us escaped that. But you see what can happen there? This is why it's important. See you tomorrow.